A powerful martial arts gym owner publicly humiliated and threatened a 40-year-old black janitor over a minor accident, convinced his money and connections made him untouchable. When a quiet man walking with a canine dog told him to stop, the bully mocked him and escalated the confrontation, not knowing the stranger was an undercover FBI agent already investigating a hidden criminal organization using the gym as a front. What looked like a simple act of cruelty would slowly unravel into a full-scale federal case, exposing money laundering, corruption, and a powerful figure pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story holds your attention, please subscribe for more stories of justice, faith, and quiet courage. A heavy autumn heat lingered over the city, the kind that pressed down on the sidewalks and made the air feel slow, thick with exhaust fumes, old brick dust, and the faint metallic scent of rain that never quite arrived. Daniel Carter walked at an unhurried pace along Maple Street, blending into the late afternoon crowd as easily as he had learned to blend into hostile villages overseas and in different American cities alike. At 35, he carried himself with a quiet discipline that most civilians mistook for confidence, but those trained to observe would have noticed the details. The way his shoulders stayed level no matter how he moved, the slight turn of his head at every intersection, the calm eyes that never truly rested. Daniel was tall without being imposing, lean rather than bulky, his dark brown hair kept short in a practical cut that revealed a face marked by sharp cheekbones and a jawline roughened by days of stubble. His skin held the faint weathered tone of a man who spent more time outdoors than he admitted, and his eyes, gray-blue and steady, belonged to someone who had seen enough chaos to no longer fear it. What had shaped him was not a single event, but a slow accumulation. Years of investigations that taught him how power hid behind ordinary storefronts, how cruelty thrived when people believed no one was watching. At his left side moved Rex, a German Shepherd canine whose presence was both calm and unmistakably alert. Rex was 5 years old, his coat a deep sable pattern streaked with black and dark brown, muscles visible beneath the fur when he shifted. His ears stood erect, constantly adjusting to sound, and his amber eyes carried a sharp intelligence that bordered on unsettling. To passers-by, Rex looked like a well-trained dog on a casual walk. To Daniel, he was a partner, conditioned to detect narcotics, illegal currency, and behavioral anomalies, but also capable of reading subtle emotional shifts before any human could articulate them. Maple Street was a strange intersection of old and new, renovated brick buildings beside aging storefronts, boutique signs sharing walls with faded business names painted decades earlier. As Daniel and Rex approached a black-painted martial arts dojo, a sharp voice cut through the ambient noise, loud enough to draw attention yet familiar in its tone, authority fueled by entitlement. Daniel slowed instinctively, his body responding before conscious thought had time to intervene. Rex stopped as well, sitting neatly at his side, his posture suddenly rigid. The voice belonged to Marcus Hill, the owner of the dojo, a man in his early 40s whose carefully cultivated image screamed dominance. Marcus was broad-shouldered, his physique built for display rather than function, muscles rounded and inflated beneath a tight designer t-shirt. His head was shaved close, emphasizing a thick neck and a face set with heavy brows and a permanent sneer. A trimmed goatee framed his mouth, but it did little to soften the cruelty in his expression. Marcus moved with the swagger of someone used to being obeyed, someone who had learned early that intimidation was easier than respect. He had a presence that filled space aggressively, not through confidence, but through noise, volume, and posture designed to loom. Standing several feet away from him was Angela Brooks, a 40-year-old black woman in a gray janitorial uniform that hung loosely on her tall, slender frame. Angela's hair was pulled back into a tight bun streaked with early silver, her dark skin marked by fine lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of exhaustion more than age. She carried herself with the quiet restraint of someone accustomed to being overlooked, shoulders slightly drawn inward, hands clasped together as if bracing for impact. A tipped-over cleaning bucket sat near her feet, water pooling across the pavement, creeping dangerously close to the polished tires of a red sports car parked illegally by the curb. Marcus's voice dripped with contempt as he gestured toward the spill, his finger jabbing the air inches from Angela's face. His words were sharp, deliberately humiliating, laced with thinly veiled racial undertones and threats about getting her fired, about knowing people who could make her life difficult. Angela murmured apologies, her voice barely audible beneath his tirade, eyes fixed on the ground as if looking up would only invite worse. Around them, pedestrians slowed, glanced over, then looked away, discomfort outweighing courage. Daniel noticed that reaction immediately, the subtle collective decision to remain uninvolved, and felt the familiar tightening in his chest that always accompanied it. Daniel stepped forward, his movement controlled, voice low but firm, as he told Marcus to back off. There was no aggression in his tone, only certainty. Marcus turned, surprise flashing across his face before morphing into derision as he sized Daniel up, dismissing him as another passerby who didn't know his place. Rex shifted slightly, a low vibration rolling through his chest, not a growl, but a warning. Marcus faltered for half a second, enough for Daniel to notice fear crack the surface of his bravado. What struck Daniel most was not Marcus's cruelty, but its ease. This was practiced behavior. The way Marcus spoke, the way Angela barely reacted, it suggested a pattern. Daniel's mind cataloged details automatically: the lack of intervention, the illegal parking, the confidence with which Marcus threatened consequences. As Marcus continued ranting, Daniel placed himself subtly between Angela and the dojo, an unspoken barrier. He didn't escalate. He didn't need to. Eventually, Marcus scoffed, issued a challenge filled with posturing bravado, and retreated toward the entrance, his ego bruised but not broken. Angela whispered a quiet thank you, her eyes meeting Daniel's for the briefest moment, filled with gratitude and something darker, resignation. As she bent to right the bucket, Daniel felt Rex's leash tighten. The dog's head turned sharply toward the rear of the dojo, ears locked, nostrils flaring as he inhaled deeply. This was not a reaction to people or noise. Daniel recognized it immediately. Rex was alerting on something else, something hidden beyond the black-painted walls, something that didn't belong in a place meant for discipline and sport. Daniel followed Rex's gaze to the shadowed alley behind the building, and in that instant, the scene on Maple Street shifted in his mind from a public humiliation to the surface crack of something far larger. The bus stop on Maple and 9th sat under a flickering sodium streetlight, its pale glow stretching thin shadows across cracked concrete and peeling transit maps that hadn't been updated in years. Daniel Carter spotted Angela Brooks before she saw him, seated rigidly on the metal bench, hands folded around the handle of a worn plastic tote as if it might disappear if she let go. Rex slowed at Daniel's side, his gait changing, head lowering slightly in quiet awareness, sensing distress without being told. Angela looked smaller at night than she had that afternoon, her tall frame folded inward by fatigue. The gray janitorial uniform she still wore was damp at the cuffs, streaked faintly with soap residue, as if she hadn't had time or the energy to change. Her face, illuminated unevenly by the streetlight, showed deep exhaustion etched into her features, fine lines at the corners of her eyes, lips pressed together in a way that suggested she had spent years swallowing words. When she finally looked up and recognized Daniel, surprise flickered across her face, followed by embarrassment, then relief she tried unsuccessfully to hide. "They let me go," she said quietly before Daniel could speak, her voice steady but hollow. "Didn't even finish my shift. Called me into the office, 10 minutes, and that was it." She gave a short, humorless breath that almost passed for a laugh. Daniel nodded once, taking the space beside her without crowding, Rex settling at his feet with deliberate calm, eyes scanning the street rather than her. Daniel had learned long ago that silence, when chosen carefully, invited truth faster than questions. Angela stared ahead, watching a city bus rumble past without slowing. "I knew it would happen," she continued. "I've seen this before. You cross him, and somehow your job disappears." She turned her head slightly now, studying Daniel with a cautious curiosity. Up close, she noticed the details others often missed, the stillness in his posture, the absence of impatience in his eyes. "You didn't look surprised," she said. "Most people are." "I've learned what power looks like when it's scared," Daniel replied, choosing his words with care. Angela's shoulders loosened a fraction. She hesitated, then reached into her tote, fingers brushing against folded cleaning rags, a dented thermos, a pair of cheap gloves. She didn't pull anything out yet. Instead, she spoke, her voice gaining a quiet urgency. "I tried to say something before," she admitted. "Months ago. To the building manager, to security. Even wrote an email once." Angela shook her head slowly. "Nothing. Or worse, warnings, subtle ones. Keep your head down, Angela. Don't make trouble." Her mouth tightened. "When you've got rent due and a mother who needs medication, silence starts to feel like survival." Daniel absorbed that without comment, though something in his chest hardened. Angela glanced toward Rex, then back at Daniel. "I work nights sometimes," she said. "That's when you see things you're not meant to." She described the deliveries, unmarked vans arriving after midnight, engines idling while crates were wheeled through the rear entrance of the dojo. Men she didn't recognize, clean-cut, well-dressed, not like students or trainers, moving with the confidence of people who expected doors to open for them. "They didn't look like fighters," she said. "They looked like office men. Suits, pressed shirts. Some of them drove cars with plates you don't forget." "Government plates," Daniel said quietly. Angela's eyes flicked to his, sharp now. She nodded. "I didn't know what that meant at first. I just knew it wasn't right." She finally reached into her tote and withdrew a small black USB drive, no larger than a thumb. The plastic was scuffed, the metal connector scratched. She held it out, then pulled it back slightly, fingers tightening. "I found it in the supply room. Someone dropped it. I didn't plug it in. I'm not stupid. But I kept it. Insurance." Daniel studied the drive, then her face. He saw fear there, but also resolve. Angela was not reckless. She was cautious to the point of self-erasure. That kind of restraint came from experience, not weakness. "You're trusting me with this," he said. "I don't trust easy," Angela replied. "But you stepped in when no one else did. And your dog." She glanced at Rex, who met her gaze calmly, tail still. "He's not just a pet. I know that much." Daniel took the USB, slipping it into his jacket pocket without ceremony. "You did the right thing," he said. Angela shook her head. "Doesn't feel like it. Feels like I waited too long." She hesitated, then added, almost in a whisper, "Marcus isn't the top. I don't know who is, but he answers to someone. I've seen him change when certain people show up. He smiles more, talks less. A car slowed near the corner, then turned away. Rex's ears tracked the sound, then relaxed. Daniel felt the shape of the investigation shifting. This was no longer a single abusive businessman abusing his reach. It was a structure, layered and protected. Angela exhaled slowly, as if releasing a weight she had carried alone. "If something happens to me," she said, not looking at Daniel, "that drive matters." "Nothing is going to happen to you tonight," Daniel replied. His tone wasn't comforting, it was certain. Angela finally looked at him fully, searching his face for something she could believe in. Whatever she saw there seemed to be enough. The bus arrived with a hydraulic hiss, doors opening. Angela stood, adjusting her tote on her shoulder. "Thank you," she said again, softer this time. As she boarded, Daniel watched the bus pull away, Rex's gaze following the dark street beyond it. Somewhere behind the dojo walls, a larger truth waited. And for the first time, Angela Brooks was no longer carrying it alone. Daniel Carter worked through the night from a sparsely furnished motel room a few blocks off the river, the kind of place chosen not for comfort, but for anonymity. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet, the air conditioner rattling unevenly as rain tapped against the window. Rex lay near the door, alert but relaxed, his long body stretched across the floor, ears flicking occasionally as cars passed outside. Under the dim desk lamp, Daniel moved with quiet efficiency, a man accustomed to making sense of chaos long after others had gone to sleep. The USB Angela Brooks had given him rested between Daniel's fingers like a small, unassuming weight. He didn't rush. He never did. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes had cost people their lives before. He powered up a hardened laptop, slid the drive in, and waited as encrypted folders appeared on the screen. What emerged was not dramatic at first glance. Spreadsheets, timestamps, short video clips taken from odd angles, but patterns began to form quickly. Cash-heavy transactions labeled as membership fees, shell companies registered in neighboring states, and recurring transfers that moved just under reporting thresholds. This was not sloppy crime. It was deliberate, methodical, designed to pass unnoticed by anyone who wasn't looking closely enough. Daniel's mind shifted fully into investigative mode, the part of him shaped by years of federal work and earlier experiences that taught him patience over impulse. He documented everything, then initiated a secure call. The screen flickered, and Sarah Donnelly appeared, her face lit by the harsh white glow of an office ceiling light. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and spare, with pale, freckled skin and auburn hair pulled into a perpetually messy knot at the back of her head. She wore wire-rimmed glasses and a navy blazer over a rumpled blouse, looking every bit the analyst who lived on caffeine and deadlines. What shaped Sarah most wasn't ambition, but disillusionment. Years spent watching cases stall because the truth was inconvenient. It had left her sharp, skeptical, and fiercely loyal to the few people she trusted. "You're up late," Sarah said, scanning Daniel's data feed as it synced. "So are the people moving this money," Daniel replied. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she absorbed the numbers. "You were right. The dojo's a funnel, but it's not the end point." She highlighted a sequence of transfers. "See this? Out-of-state accounts, 2 layers removed, someone skimming clean." By morning, the case had expanded. Field reports confirmed the martial arts studio as a front, cheap classes masking inflated fees, payments laundered through fake equipment vendors, funds exiting state lines before returning as investments. Marcus Hill, it became clear, was not the architect. He was a node. Daniel felt no satisfaction in that realization, only the cold clarity of a larger problem. Criminal structures rarely relied on brute force alone. They thrived on legitimacy, paperwork, and people who looked respectable enough to escape suspicion. Late afternoon, Daniel returned to Maple Street with Rex, this time circling the block from the opposite direction. The dojo looked ordinary in daylight. students entering with gym bags, parents waiting on benches. But Rex's behavior changed the moment they reached the rear alley. The dog's pace slowed, nose lifting, body tensing as he inhaled deeply. His tail stilled, a clear signal. Daniel followed, heart steady, senses sharpening. Behind the building, near a reinforced service door, Rex sat abruptly, eyes fixed, chest rising and falling in controlled breaths. This wasn't narcotics alone. Daniel recognized the layered scent profile, large amounts of currency, chemical residue consistent with performance enhancers, something older and metallic that spoke of long-term storage. A man exited the back door moments later, mid-30s, average build, baseball cap pulled low, posture stiff with nervous energy. He froze when he saw Rex, then recovered quickly, offering a forced smile before retreating. Daniel didn't pursue. Not yet. Surveillance was about restraint as much as action. That evening, Daniel met Sarah in person at a small diner across the river. She slid into the booth opposite him, shrugging off her coat, her expression grim. "I pulled personnel history on Marcus Hill," she said, lowering her voice. "You're not going to like this." She pushed a printed file across the table. Daniel scanned it once, then again, slower. Marcus Hill, former confidential informant, recruited years earlier after a minor fraud charge. Initially cooperative, providing intelligence on underground fight circuits and cash movements. Then the reports stopped. Payments continued for a while. After that, nothing. The file ended with a dry note. CI terminated due to credibility concerns. Daniel leaned back, absorbing the weight of it. That explained Marcus's confidence, his familiarity with intimidation and manipulation, his belief that consequences were negotiable. He hadn't just learned how to exploit people, he'd learned how to exploit systems. Sarah watched Daniel carefully. "He knows how investigations work," she said. "Knows how to stay just clean enough." Daniel nodded. "And he knows who he answers to." Outside, Rex lay beneath the booth, head resting on his paws, eyes open and attentive. Daniel reached down, resting a hand briefly on the dog's neck, grounding himself. This was no longer about exposing a single abusive businessman. It was about peeling back layers of protection built by someone who understood law enforcement from the inside. The cover had cracked, but what lay beneath was more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. As Daniel stepped back onto the street later that night, the city felt different, not hostile, but deceptive in its calm. Lights glowed warmly in windows. Traffic flowed. Life went on, unaware of the machinery turning quietly beneath it. Daniel looked once more toward the dojo's darkened rear entrance, already thinking several moves ahead. Marcus Hill had once been useful to the Bureau. Now he was something else entirely, and that knowledge would change everything. Daniel Carter read the message twice before locking his phone and sliding it back into his pocket. Marcus Hill hadn't bothered with subtlety. The challenge was public, plastered across the dojo's social media pages and shared through local forums. A charity exhibition match, legally sanctioned, open to spectators, framed as community engagement. Marcus had turned humiliation into spectacle, daring Daniel to step onto the mat and prove himself. To most people, it would look like ego. To Daniel, it was bait, and carefully constructed bait at that. The briefing room at the temporary FBI field office was windowless and cold, lit by fluorescent panels that flattened every face beneath them. Daniel stood while Sarah Donnelly leaned against the table, arms crossed, eyes sharp behind her glasses. Across from them sat Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Thomas Reed, a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed beard that framed a face worn by decades of bureaucratic compromise. Reed was broad through the shoulders, once athletic, now softened slightly by age, but his posture still carried the authority of someone used to making final calls. He listened without interrupting as Daniel laid out Marcus's move, the legality of the match, and the potential implications. "He's testing you," Reed said finally, voice low and measured, "seeing how far you'll step outside the lines." "He's also trying to reassert control," Daniel replied. "Publicly," Sarah nodded. "And if we shut it down now, he goes quiet again. We lose momentum." Reed studied Daniel for a long moment. "You stay and roll," he said. "Civilian, no badge. We let him think he's winning." It wasn't permission given lightly. It was a calculated risk, one Reed understood all too well. Daniel nodded once. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous traps were the ones you entered willingly. The night before the match, the city settled into an uneasy calm. Daniel had chosen a modest hotel on the edge of downtown, the kind frequented by traveling contractors and off-duty flight crews. Anonymous, forgettable. Rex paced the room slowly, nails clicking softly against the laminate floor, his movements deliberate. At 5 years old, Rex was at the height of his working life, his body lean and powerful, scars hidden beneath fur that bore witness to years of controlled violence. Daniel trusted Rex more than most people. The dog's instincts had saved lives before, including his own. Just after midnight, Rex froze. His head snapped toward the door, ears erect, body coiling like a spring. Daniel didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for stillness. A faint sound followed, the scrape of metal against metal, the careful testing of a lock by someone who thought patience was protection. Daniel shifted his weight, positioning himself in shadow, hand resting lightly on Rex's harness. The door burst inward seconds later, splintering wood and cheap hardware as two men lunged inside. They were amateurs, big but clumsy. One was thick-necked and shaved bald, tattoos crawling up his forearms, breathing already heavy with adrenaline. The other was leaner, jittery, eyes darting as if he expected resistance, but didn't quite know how to handle it. The attack was over in moments. Rex launched with silent precision, slamming into the first man's chest, teeth finding fabric and flesh without hesitation. Daniel moved simultaneously, closing distance on the second attacker, striking fast and clean, targeting nerves and balance rather than bones. When it ended, both men were on the floor, groaning, hands empty, fear replacing bravado. Daniel didn't call the police. Not yet. He tied their hands, checked them for weapons, and waited until their breathing slowed enough to talk. They didn't know much, just names passed through intermediaries, cash payments, instructions to slow him down. It was enough. Daniel released them with a warning they didn't need to hear twice. When they stumbled out into the night, Rex watched them go, posture calm but ready. By morning, Daniel had made his decision. He reported the incident through secure channels, not as an assault but as confirmation. Reed's response was immediate and curt. "Proceed." Daniel showered, changed, and before leaving the hotel, wrapped his left forearm tightly, layering padding beneath a sleeve, moving as if it caused him discomfort. Rex watched, head tilted slightly, understanding the performance without instruction. The dojo buzzed with anticipation as spectators filtered in that afternoon. Marcus Hill stood at the center of it all, grinning broadly, his confidence restored by the rumor he had planted himself. He was dressed in a pristine gi, black belt knotted carefully, posture radiating control. When Daniel entered, moving slower than usual, favoring one arm, Marcus's eyes lit up. He noticed the wrap. He noticed the stiffness. He noticed what he wanted to notice. Rex remained at Daniel's side, calm, obedient, drawing glances from the crowd. Marcus approached, voice low enough to sound almost friendly. "Looks like you had a rough night," he said, lips curling. Daniel met his gaze evenly. "Nothing I can't handle." Inside, Daniel felt the familiar shift, the narrowing of focus, the quiet acceptance of risk. This was the moment Reed had warned him about, the thin edge between control and chaos. Marcus believed he had already won. That belief was the real trap. As Daniel stepped onto the mat, the noise of the room faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of his own breath and the silent presence of Rex behind him. Marcus rolled his shoulders, relaxed, overconfident. He had no reason to suspect the truth, and that was exactly how Daniel needed it to be. The dojo was louder than Daniel expected, not with chaos, but with anticipation, the kind that crackled just beneath the skin. Folding chairs lined the walls, packed shoulder to shoulder with spectators drawn by rumor and spectacle. Parents, local business owners, curious college kids, and a handful of off-duty city employees filled the space, their faces lit by overhead lights that reflected harshly off the polished mats. Phones were already raised, red recording icons glowing like small warning lights. This was not a private settling of scores. This was theater, and Marcus Hill had written himself as the hero. Marcus stood near the center of the mat, rolling his shoulders with exaggerated ease. He looked every inch the dominant figure he wanted the room to see. Broad chest, squared jaw, veins standing out along his forearms as if effort alone sustained them. His shaved head gleamed under the lights, and his neatly trimmed goatee framed a smile that never reached his eyes. Marcus thrived on attention. It fed the insecurity that had grown in him long before today, back when he learned that intimidation worked faster than respect. He bowed to the crowd, soaking in scattered applause like proof of invincibility, then glanced toward Daniel with a grin that assumed victory was already written. Daniel entered without ceremony. He wore plain athletic clothes, nothing that drew attention, his left arm still wrapped beneath the sleeve as planned. He moved carefully, just enough to sell the story, favoring the limb when he thought eyes were on him. To anyone watching closely, he looked tense, perhaps injured, certainly outmatched by Marcus's physical confidence. Rex remained near the edge of the mat, sitting upright, ears forward, his presence quiet but undeniable. The dog's sable coat caught the light in subtle ripples as he shifted his weight, amber eyes fixed not on Marcus, but on the room itself, cataloging movement. A volunteer referee, young, nervous, barely out of his 20s, stepped between them. He had the look of someone promoted too quickly, thin build, pale skin, dark hair plastered flat with sweat before the match even began. His hands trembled as he explained the rules, voice cracking slightly when Marcus interrupted him with a laugh and a dismissive wave. Daniel listened without expression, breathing slow, steady, letting the noise fade until only the mat beneath his feet mattered. The match began with Marcus circling theatrically, throwing light kicks into empty air, testing Daniel's reactions. Each move was designed to look impressive, to elicit gasps and murmurs from the crowd. Daniel retreated just enough to reinforce the illusion, keeping his guard loose, eyes unreadable. He could feel the familiar narrowing of focus settle over him, the mental quiet that came when action replaced analysis. This wasn't about proving strength, it was about control. Marcus struck first in earnest, a heavy roundhouse kick aimed high. Daniel stepped aside, absorbing the impact against his shoulder with a controlled turn, letting his wrapped arm take the brunt just long enough to draw a reaction. The crowd murmured. Marcus smiled wider. He pressed forward, throwing combinations meant to overwhelm, his breathing already growing harsher. Daniel noted it calmly. Marcus fought with ego. Ego burned fuel fast. Daniel waited. He always did. When Marcus overcommitted on a wide punch, Daniel moved inside the strike, his timing precise, his response economical. A quick shift of weight, a sweep that took Marcus's balance, followed by a controlled takedown that put him flat on the mat with a thud that echoed through the room. Gasps replaced cheers. Marcus scrambled up, anger flashing now, his composure cracking. The second exchange was shorter. Marcus lunged, reckless, trying to reclaim dominance through force alone. Daniel ended it cleanly, a joint lock applied with surgical precision, pressure increasing just enough to make resistance futile without causing permanent damage. Marcus froze, shock and pain colliding in his expression. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then the referee shouted the call, voice high with disbelief. It was over. Daniel released the hold immediately and stepped back, hands lowering to his sides. He didn't raise his arms. He didn't look to the crowd. The victory was swift, undeniable, and deliberately uncelebrated. That restraint unsettled people more than any display of triumph could have. Marcus remained on one knee, breathing hard, eyes darting around the room as reality set in. Whispers spread, the sound of a narrative shifting in real time. Marcus stood abruptly, shoving past the referee, his face flushed deep red. He barked excuses, rules misunderstood, distractions, bad footing, each word louder than the last, each more desperate. His gaze flicked toward Daniel, then to Rex, then back to the spectators who no longer looked impressed. Control was slipping, and Marcus felt it. He stormed off the mat, shouting at staff, knocking over a chair in his path. Phones followed him, recording every second. Daniel remained where he was until the room began to settle. Only then did he nod once toward the referee and step away. Rex rose instantly, falling into step at his side, posture calm, protective. As they exited, Daniel caught Marcus watching from the far side of the room, eyes burning with something darker than humiliation. It wasn't defeat that frightened Marcus. It was exposure. Outside, the evening air felt cooler, heavier. Daniel walked a block before stopping, letting the noise behind them fade. His phone buzzed once. A single message from Reed. Hold. Don't move. Daniel exhaled slowly. Marcus had lost publicly, but the real objective hadn't been met yet. The trap required patience. Behind them, inside the dojo, Marcus Hill paced like a caged animal, making calls, barking orders, trying to reassert control before it vanished completely. And, somewhere beneath the city's ordinary rhythm, pressure began to build. The days after the match felt deceptively quiet, the city resuming its rhythm as if nothing significant had shifted. But Daniel Carter knew better. Pressure never announced itself. It accumulated. From a borrowed office in the federal building's basement, Daniel watched the data scroll across his screen, while Rex lay beside his chair, chin on paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. The dog had learned the cadence of work, the long stillness punctuated by moments of sharp focus, and matched it instinctively. Outside, autumn rain traced thin lines down the narrow windows, blurring the skyline into gray smears. Marcus Hill moved fast. That much was clear. Within 48 hours of the public loss, shell accounts that had been dormant lit up again, cash flows rerouted with sudden urgency. The dojo's membership fees spiked, equipment invoices doubled, and funds jumped state lines in tighter intervals, no longer spaced for camouflage. Marcus was trying to outrun embarrassment with velocity, to drown exposure in motion. Sarah Donnelly leaned over Daniel's shoulder, auburn hair slipping free of its knot, glasses riding low as she tracked the transfers. "He's panicking," she said, voice clipped, "shortening the chain. That's how people make mistakes." Daniel nodded. Panic compressed decision-making. It revealed hierarchy. The money no longer looped lazily through 3 intermediaries. It snapped directly to a holding entity with a bland name and a downtown address. Sarah pulled the registry. "Civic Development Consulting," she read, unimpressed. "That's not a business. That's a curtain." She tapped the screen. "And look who signs off." The name sat there without flourish. Councilman Robert H. Langford. Daniel felt the shape of the case change again, settling into something heavier. Langford was a fixture in the city, late 50s, tall, broad-shouldered, silver hair combed neatly back from a high forehead. The kind of face that looked trustworthy under soft lighting. Publicly, he was affable, known for shaking hands too long and laughing a beat louder than necessary. Privately, he was meticulous. Old photos showed him leaner, sharper-eyed, a former prosecutor who'd built a reputation on cleaning up the streets before discovering the quieter power of budgets and zoning boards. Success had softened his edges, but not his appetite. Daniel arranged to speak with Angela Brooks that evening, choosing a neutral place, a community center a few blocks from her old route, fluorescent lit and echoing, chairs stacked against the wall. Angela arrived wrapped in a borrowed coat, posture still guarded but steadier now. Her tall frame carried fatigue, yet her eyes were clearer than before. Rex greeted her with a gentle wag, then settled again, sensing the gravity in the room. When Daniel showed her Langford's photo, recognition passed across Angela's face like a shadow. She inhaled sharply. "That's him," she said. "Not all the time, but enough." She described the nights he came. No entourage, no raised voice, just a nod to Marcus and a quiet word exchanged near the back door. "He stood like he owned the place," she said, fingers worrying the edge of her sleeve. "Didn't look around. Didn't have to." She remembered the car, too, dark sedan, government plates that caught the light when it idled in the alley. The memory tightened her jaw. "When he showed up, Marcus stopped acting tough. He listened." Daniel thanked her and arranged protection without dramatics. He knew fear could be managed. Uncertainty was harder. As Angela left, Sarah caught Daniel's eye. "She's sure," Sarah said. "That matters." The Bureau moved quietly. They didn't touch Langford, not yet. Instead, they mapped his influence. Rezoning approvals that coincided with cash inflows. Non-profits seeded with donations that flowed back through consultants. Favors exchanged in committee rooms where minutes went thin. Marcus's accounts fed the machine. Langford's signature turned it. Rex accompanied Daniel on a late-night walk past Civic Development's offices, the dog's nose lifting as they passed the service entrance. The scent was familiar now. Old paper, metal safes, currency that had been counted too many times. Rex paused, sat, and looked up. Confirmation without words. Marcus, meanwhile, unraveled. Calls went unanswered. Meetings were rescheduled, then canceled. Daniel watched footage from a parking garage where Marcus argued with a man twice his size, gestures wild, face slick with sweat. The confidence that once made him dangerous had inverted into desperation. He was burning bridges he'd sworn were permanent. That was the tell. A meeting convened before dawn. ASAC Thomas Reed stood at the head of the table, beard shadowed, eyes tired but resolute. "We don't spook Langford," he said. "We let Marcus pull tighter until the rope shows." Daniel understood. They weren't hunting a man. They were isolating a system. That night, Daniel stood across the river, watching the city's lights tremble on the water. Rex pressed close, a warm, steady presence. Somewhere behind those lights, Langford slept well, believing himself insulated by paperwork and respectability. Somewhere closer, Marcus paced, convinced he was still steering. Daniel knew the truth now, and it settled in his chest with the weight of inevitability. Marcus Hill had never been the destination. He was a lever, meant to be pulled until it snapped. And when it did, the real power would have nowhere left to hide. Dawn broke pale and deliberate over the city, a thin mist clinging to rooftops and traffic lights as if reluctant to let go. Daniel Carter stood inside an unmarked command van 2 blocks from the dojo, the glow of monitors reflecting in his eyes. Rex sat at his heel, muscles coiled beneath sable fur, 8 years old now, seasoned, disciplined, his amber gaze steady. The dog had learned the difference between waiting and ending things. This morning was the latter. Sarah Donnelly moved between screens with practiced efficiency. She was in her late 30s, tall and angular, her auburn hair pulled into a severe bun that emphasized sharp cheekbones and pale, freckled skin. Years in financial crimes had etched focus into her posture. She spoke little when it mattered most. "Search warrants are live," she said. "Langford's office, residence, civic development, and the dojo. Simultaneous entry. No leaks." On Daniel's earpiece, ASAC Thomas Reed's voice came through calm and gravelly, shaped by decades of command. Reed was a broad man in his early 60s, salt and pepper beard trimmed close, eyes heavy-lidded but penetrating. A heart attack 5 years earlier had slowed his stride but sharpened his judgment. "Move," he said simply. The teams went in together. The dojo doors came down with controlled force, agents flooding the space that once echoed with performative discipline. Marcus Hill was caught mid-shout in his office, rage frozen into confusion as cuffs closed around his wrists. Without the crowd, without the costume of authority, he looked smaller, thick neck, shaved jaw, sweat darkening his collar. He protested loudly, then quietly, then not at all when evidence bags began stacking on the desk. Cash, burner phones, ledgers that told a clearer story than his mouth ever had. Across town, the second door opened with less noise but greater consequence. Councilman Robert H. Langford was escorted from his townhouse just after sunrise, robe half-tied, hair still neat, the practiced smile failing to find a place to land. Up close, his confidence revealed its brittleness, the faint tremor in his hands, the way his eyes searched for someone who would intervene. He said nothing as agents cataloged documents, seized drives, photographed a life constructed on plausible deniability. The fall of a man like Langford was never loud. It was surgical. Daniel moved with Rex through the rear alley of the dojo, the place where the story had first cracked. The dog's nose led him unerringly to a steel door now pried open, the stale smell of currency and chemicals lingering like a confession. Daniel watched evidence being logged and felt the peculiar quiet that followed a long pursuit. Not relief, completion. Angela Brooks arrived hours later, escorted but unrestrained. She stood at the perimeter, tall and dark-skinned, her posture still careful, hands folded as if unsure where to rest. The fear that once hunched her shoulders had loosened its grip. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, borrowed confidence stitched together from small reassurances. When Daniel approached, she met his eyes without flinching. "They told me," she said. Her voice was steady. "Charges dropped. They're apologizing." She almost laughed at the word. "Restitution's in process," Daniel said, "and the city offered you a position, full-time, benefits." Angela exhaled, a sound like a knot untying. "My mother," she said. "I can take her to her appointments without begging for shifts." She looked down at Rex, who sat calmly, tail still. "Thank you," she added, not just to Daniel. The dog lifted his head slightly, acknowledging her in his way. By afternoon, the press had arrived, cameras catching fragments of truth as it was explained in careful language. Marcus Hill's name scrolled beneath headlines about fraud and coercion. Robert Langford's image followed, the word investigation doing more damage than any accusation. The city absorbed the shock in stages: anger, disbelief, then the slow recalibration that followed exposure. Inside the federal building, Daniel closed the case file with a measured breath. Sarah leaned against the table, exhaustion softening her features. "Clean finish," she said, "as clean as it gets." She hesitated. "You did right by her." Daniel nodded. He believed outcomes mattered more than praise. ASAC Reed entered last, jacket draped over one arm. He looked older now, the lines deeper. "Good work," he said, then slid a slim folder across the table. But don't unpack. Daniel opened it. Different cities, different names, familiar patterns. The same architecture of crime wearing a new face. He felt the weight settle again, not dread, not excitement, but purpose. Outside, evening found him on the steps with Rex beside him, the city breathing easier behind them. Angela passed once more, this time walking with confidence, a future no longer hostage to someone else's ego. Daniel watched her go, then looked down at his partner. "Ready?" he asked. Rex rose, steady and sure, eyes forward. The case was closed. The work was not. Thank you for walking this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, leave a prayer below and share it with someone who needs hope today. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of faith, healing, and the quiet miracles God places in our lives. May God bless you and your family always.